Good morning and welcome to worship at Pullen. March 15th of this year, that was the last time we worshiped together in person in this sanctuary. That following week, a shelter-in-place order was issued, and we began live streaming our services that very next Sunday. In the days and weeks since that time, much has happened. In addition to the global pandemic, we are witnessing a national call to dismantle America's systems of racism, declaring with community action that Black Lives Matter. In the midst of this global pandemic and the nation's response to racism, our daily lives have continued to unfold. There have been births and deaths, celebrations and lamentations. Relationships have started and relationships have ended. Some of our friends have had major surgery and are recovering or have recovered. For some who live alone, this time of isolation continues to be almost overwhelming. Routines have changed and new ones have been added. School is now home-based. When all of this began on March 15th, we never imagined that some 14 weeks later, we would still be unable to gather in person for worship. But here we are. And while we have had difficulties with our live streaming, our worship experiences have been moving and inspiring, comforting and challenging. Your presence online has made all the difference as you share your greetings and your thoughts in the comments section of our live stream. So many of you have shared with me how much the worship services have meant to you in this time of isolation. Please know that to your staff, your presence with us on Sunday morning means the world to us. Your presence encourages us to remain strong and courageous in these days. And so again, this morning, we gather to worship, to be both comforted by our faith and challenged by our faith and the words of Jesus that call us to serve justice, love. As we begin our worship, hear now these concerns of our church family. Tony Golston, a regular Pullen attendee and friend of Valerie Collins, died on Monday. We hold Valerie and Tony's family in our prayers. Linda Garrett requests the prayers for her brother Larry, who fell off of a ladder and broke numerous bones in his body. We hold in our prayers Carla Rector as she begins chemotherapy for breast cancer this week. We also hold in our prayers Penny Shelton. Penny is recovering from surgery in which she had 3 vertebrae in her neck fused together. We pray for Penny's recovery. And we hold in our prayers Angie Britton Free, daughter of Mary Ann Britton. Angie has had a reoccurrence of Hodgkin's lymphoma. I'm sure there are other concerns that you hold in your heart and in your mind, as well as celebrations and joys that you are experiencing. And as we bring all of these concerns and joys and celebrations to our time of prayer, we are privileged this morning to have a guest soloist, Kimberly Chante, and an accompanist, Preston Wilson, who will lead us into our call to prayer with that beautiful, comforting hymn, "His Eye is on the Sparrow." We know that in these times and in our world where there's great pain and suffering, that God is in it all. God is with us in our pain and in our suffering. God's eye is on the sparrow. And while we often wonder where God is in this world that is hurting and suffering. Our faith reminds us and we affirm that God is indeed with us in that suffering and pain. And so let us gather all of that together and now move into a time in which we pray together and lift our prayers to the universe.
Discouraged, and why should the shadows come, and why should my heart feel lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, a constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches. I know He watches. I know He watches me.
Gracious God, we give thanks for the assurance of your presence. We give thanks for another day of life and an opportunity to be present with you. We thank you for the constant companionship of your Spirit that sustains us when we must be distant from those to whom we long to be close. We thank you that that very same Spirit still binds us together with unbreakable cords. God, we offer gratitude for the joys that give us reason to sing songs of thanksgiving. And during this week, since the last time we talked to you, we didn't always pause to acknowledge the blessings that confronted us. Blessings of unusual provision, of serendipitous encounters, of conflicts that challenge us to grow. And so we take this opportunity to say thank you, and maybe even make a joyful noise and say hallelujah. God, we thank you that you hear songs of thanksgiving and songs of lament. And we are concerned for those that we love. They're sick, they're struggling, they're grieving, they're lonely, they're oppressed. God, we're concerned for our nation. We're concerned even for our own well-being and security. At times we're anxious because we don't know what will happen next. But then again, we never did know. And so we place ourselves securely in your care, and we find peace there, for we cannot add a day to our lives by worrying. And we know that in life and in death you are with us, for your eyes beheld our unformed substance, and when we come to the end, we find that you are still there. It is because of your constant care and companionship that we are afflicted but not crushed, perplexed but not driven to despair, persecuted but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. We are free and we are empowered so that others might live in freedom. Let us work continually, assured of your care for us, for your justice, love in the world. Amen.
Our scripture reading for today is the gospel text from Matthew. The lectionary text is Matthew 10:24 through 39. But this morning we'll be reading verses 34 through 39, and Shalise and I will share in a conversation about this text with you this morning. But hear now these words from the Gospel of Matthew. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Jesus in his teachings often uses story and parable to make his point. He tells a story and then he leaves the hearers to discern a lesson, oftentimes leaving us with a question like, who was the neighbor to this man? One of the things that has always caught my attention about the way Jesus taught was how his parables were multi-layered, multi-dimensional. In reading them and studying them, there's always the possibility to see something new, to hear the parable differently, so as to come to a new understanding of what Jesus was teaching about. Today's gospel reading is a bit of a departure from Jesus' storytelling, parable crafting way of teaching. In today's gospel, Jesus comes out with at least 3 very bold statements. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. And then he follows that bold statement with another bold statement. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's own household. And then finally, the last in this series of bold statements from Jesus, he says, those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Shalice, I dare say that these are some of the hardest teachings of Jesus. Why? Because they run counter to everything we've been taught and what we've been taught to value. Peacemakers, that's what we're supposed to be, peacemakers. Jesus even says, blessed are the peacemakers. Our faith has conditioned us almost at all cost to be peacemakers. We're told, don't create conflict, keep the peace. Live peaceably with one another. Beat our swords into plowshares. But here it seems that Jesus is giving us a different perspective. He's saying something that seems opposite to all of those other messages we've received about peacemaking. And so I'm wondering, what do we think he means in this when he says, I've come not to bring peace, but a sword? And I'm wondering specifically in our context today, does the peacemaking of Jesus generate violence for healing, for restoration, and for justice? I'm wondering.
Yeah. Well, Malcolm X says that you can't separate peace from freedom because nobody can be at peace unless they are free. And Martin Luther King reminds us that peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. And so I think what Jesus is suggesting to us and a helpful balance, right? Because when you were just talking about, how it kind of runs counter to what we feel like we've heard from Jesus, I was just thinking on what I might say depending on the day. It depends, on the context. And sometimes when we've been heavy in one area, we have to kind of usher in some balance, unless we kind of get confused about what Jesus' message really was. But I think to say that I've not come to bring peace, maybe at least it means peace in the way that you think of it. Because if Jesus truly does come to free the oppressed, if Jesus truly is a chain breaker and one who declares good news and a good proclamation to the poor, then that is going to disturb the peace of those who are in the establishment, of those who have benefited off the backs of the poor. And so, I think part of what he's saying is this is going to hurt a little. This thing that I'm trying to inaugurate, it's not going to be comfortable. At least not for everybody. And I think that we have to be able to begin to kind of embrace that discomfort because freeing those who are oppressed, freedom for the oppressed will feel like violence to the oppressor, right? It is attempting to upend a system that works extremely well for them. And so it can feel like an assault, I think, in ways that Jesus is trying to tell us to push into, right? Because when people push back and say, I feel like you're attacking me, then to say, well, this is part of what justice, this is part of what freedom looks like. And so yeah, and I think also, this idea, you asked the question of does the peacemaking of Jesus generate violence? And, I've noticed that people define violence very, very differently lately. I'm surprised to hear of, broken windows or damaged property as violence, because I tend to think of violence as something that is done to people. But to say that if my property gets damaged in your calls or your cries for freedom says a lot about what we value, right? Because what I've noticed is that when stuff started to get torn up, then that's when people started moving. Like that's when leaders in our city started mobilizing, right? But we're not moved in the same way by the cries of people who have been crying since Eric Gardner, since Michael Brown, since Tamir Rice, and so it's very interesting. I think it reveals something about what we value when we say that this is violent.
Right. Yeah, I think that one of the things I was thinking about is that how, the critique of this, I'm okay with the protests as long as they're peaceful protests. Mm-hmm. And really questioning what does that mean? I mean, when you think about the protests that have taken place here in Raleigh in our own city, and we look at them happening all around the world, those protests are about justice. Mm-hmm. They're about having justice and demanding justice for black lives mm-hmm. and for black people. And so I don't know how you separate out, calling those protests violent mm-hmm. when what they're doing is demanding justice. Mm-hmm.
And into violence.
And into and into the real violence that is taking place against black and brown and indigenous people and poor people, around the violence of denying people health care mm-hmm. and the violence of denying people the right to vote. If we want to talk about violence, what are the violent acts of today? Those are the violent acts of today, and I think you're right. At least I think Jesus is challenging us in this text to see that sometimes to move toward peace and justice, sometimes you have to experience the tearing down of things, the breaking apart of things, the destruction of things that are upholding that violence. And so for me, I tend to think when I read these words, I have not come to bring peace, but to bring a sword. I think Jesus is saying, I'm not here to bring this kind of kumbaya peace. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to bring this kind of peace where we say, okay, at the Thanksgiving table, everybody's going to sit around and be nice to one another and not talk about anything that really matters, because we're going to have a peaceful Thanksgiving meal or a peaceful Christmas. We're going, I think that's where we get peace confused and what we think even peace is. Mm-hmm. And so I think Jesus is kind of challenging us that peace is not this fluff, this kind of empty call to not create conflict,
right? Or this this complete personal comfort, right? That is not peace.
Yeah, I think so. The next challenge that Jesus issues in these bold statements is about relationship. This one's really hard. We place value on staying in relationship with one another. And maybe especially even when we disagree with one another. In the Christian church and in faith, we got to be able to disagree with one another and stay in relationship. And I believe that's true. We talk about our faith being a relational faith. We're meant to be in relationship with one another. In this faith, we were not created to be isolated, to be out of relationship. But I think here in our text, which is, I think the church has struggled, Christians have struggled with this text a lot. It seems that Jesus, to me at least, is raising a question of relationship priority. I'm thinking about, when I say that, I'm thinking about the last 3 years and how many stories I have heard about families struggling over the political and religious divide that's in our country right now, and families struggling to stay kind to one another and compassionate and actually in relationship to one another. I've heard many stories about families that, are struggling because of the diverse views in a family, the Trump supporters, the non-Trump supporters, the fundamentalist supporters, the liberal supporters. And even before that, the many, many stories I heard from the LGBTIA community who struggle with family relationships when they come out to their families. And these stories are so painful and deeply hurtful of people who love one another and care for one another, but who struggle staying in relationship with one another. And so I wonder, let me get to my point here, I wonder if James Baldwin was echoing Jesus' thoughts and intent when Baldwin wrote, "We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist." So I'm wondering how we hold this tension of prioritizing the call to follow Jesus and what that means with the relationships that we hold within our families, within our friends, and especially when there is deep disagreement about fundamental issues of our right to exist and our humanity. And so I'm wondering, can we no longer remain in relationship with people we love and care about if being in that relationship is causing harm, and if we choose to not maintain relationship with people we love and care about because of these very fundamental issues, my right to exist as a human being, then are we being unfaithful if we have to break relationship at some point?
I feel like Jesus was very intentional about defining or redefining what family is, and then, so by extension, I think, kind of reorienting where our allegiance should be. This is Jesus who says, like, if you can't leave your family, then don't come follow me. This is Jesus who says, when his mother and his brothers are looking for him, like, who are my mother and my brothers? Those who do the will of God. And so, I think what Jesus does is give us an opportunity to say that somebody has told you that these are the people that you have to be in closest relationship to. And I've called you to be in closest relationship with those who, from the gospel lesson last week, are harassed and helpless, right? So Jesus gives us permission to prioritize those relationships. And because our family is our family, and we have this kind of cultural expectation that we still should be close, I think oftentimes the opportunity to have relationship with those folks is always going to be there. But if in our following of Jesus faithfully, that causes somebody to have to, I think, break relationship with us, or if we say, well, if I'm in solidarity with this person over here and this is where you are, then I can't navigate being close to you and being in solidarity with them. So I'm going to make a decision. I think we're right in doing that. I think we probably deal with a lot of guilt in doing that, but that is as old as the family system. We have new issues that bring this to bear, but it's not really a new problem, right? Because every time somebody kind of defines themselves over and against the system that they come from, that system is always going to say, no, come back, be like us. And that's simply not what Jesus calls us to do.
Right. And I think for me, Shalisa, I want to speak specifically at this point to my family in the LGBTQIA community. Because specifically, and I hear these stories all the time, many in the LGBTQIA community, they don't want to cut their relationships with their family. But in the cases where those families continue to speak words of oppression and continue to deny their loved one the right to exist as God created them, I want to be clear that they are not being unfaithful to God or to their family if they cut those relationships. Because God doesn't call us, any of us, to be in relationships that are harmful. God doesn't call any of us to stay in relationships that continually beat us down and make us less human than who we are and tell us that God doesn't love us or approve of us. And so I want to be clear here that while I know this is a hard issue, because we do have some responsibility to maintaining relationship, and yet when those relationships become harmful because of oppression and denying someone their humanity, violence and their right to exist, we have to walk away from those relationships. It is not right. It is not right to put oneself continually in a relationship, whether that be with a family or a church, where they're constantly telling you and oppressing you because of who God created you to be. And I want to be really clear about that, because that burden has been, I've heard that burden placed on so many people's shoulders. In the LGBT community, you know, I love my parents and I want to stay in contact with them, but every single time they try to reach out and stay in contact, you know, all that can be said is, you're going to hell, you're sinning, you're not, you know, you're something's wrong with you. And I just think God loves us so much bigger than to think we have to stay in that place to hear those words. And so I want to say, God frees us to leave those relationships that cause us harm and oppress us. So I don't know if you.
I don't, you know, and provides family for us, right? And when we feel freed to not to have to primarily invest in those toxic relationships, we can invest in relationships with people who care for us and kind of receive even in more abundance the love that God pours out to us.
Well, finally, this third bold statement that Jesus makes, that I know as long as I've been a person of faith, tried to figure out what this means, that in order to find life, we must lose life. We live in a culture that teaches us to preserve life at all cost. Live safe. You know, our medical profession is designed to just pour all kinds of resources into saving life. It's that oath that doctors take, you know, is to save life. Find life, we're told, in all of the commercialism of this nation. Find life in things, and once you have these things, the right iPhone, the right iPad, the right car, the right house, whatever it is, the right shoes, then you've got life. You've achieved the good life. And what Jesus is saying is something I think we don't process a lot in our culture, and that is being in the life of faith and following Jesus is constantly about letting go of this life in order to find where abundant life really resides. And so at the core of this statement, I'm wondering if Jesus is asking the most basic identity question. Mm-hmm. Where are you going to place your identity as a follower of Jesus? And what does that mean then about what we have to let go of?
Yeah. Well, yeah, Jesus, I feel like Jesus was always clear about this. Before, like people would try to follow him, and he's like, I don't think you want to do that, because it's not easy. Are you sure you want to do this? And we wrestle against, and I've been in this place before. I've stood at the altar and given many invitations to Christian discipleship, and told people that this is the best life you can give, but it was kind of like cast in consumerism, right? And the ideas that we have about the good life, right? That you can get those things and find those things in Jesus. And that's just not really what Jesus says. But I mean, as you mentioned, really challenges us to believe that this life that I've called you to, which is a life of sacrifice, this life that asks you to die every single day,
every day.
is really a life of abundance, right? And I want to believe in my mind that I agree with Jesus. But I know, as Paul said, there's something else warring in my members, in my body, right? Where I kind of struggle to, in practice, carry out the faith that I say that I have, right? And I mean, sometimes it's a real struggle because, you look at people, when I was broke, I had a lot more anxiety than I did when, I knew how I was gonna pay my bills. And so it's hard, sometimes it's hard to know, but then but sometimes that, there are plenty of people who have money and who have lots of it and have lots of anxiety that comes along with it as well. So that's my everyday struggle, to believe Jesus in this, to divest in the systems that I've been told are life-giving, and to follow Jesus in something else. And that doesn't even mean that I can't pursue things that give me enjoyment. Sometimes it's even forsaking, and I think I've been more aware of it since we've been on, what is it? The stay-at-home order?
Yeah, shelter in place.
Shelter in place. I always just call it lockdown, but I didn't want to use those words. But since we've been sheltering in place, right? Just allowing, just allowing yourself kind of not to conform to these strict or to allow everybody to have a claim on you and your time, right? To give yourself an opportunity to rest, or an opportunity to take Sabbath, and just to say you don't have to live in the way that people are saying you have to live in order to be able to make it. You don't have to work, 80 hours a week. Right. You don't have to, not ever see your family in order to have this abundant life. So I think there is, I think as we try it, we experience it, and the challenge for us is, because I think we can assent to this, can I go beyond self-care to care of all humanity in my turning away from what I've been told is the good life and how to achieve it?
Yeah, I like what you're saying. The distinction I hear you making, Shalise, is that the things within themselves are not bad. Mm-hmm. Being able to pay your bills.
I like that.
It's not a bad thing. It's the attachment that we place to those things. It's when we put our full identity in those things that I think we start to risk living this abundant life that Jesus offers to us. It's when we attach ourselves, and that's why I raised the question: is this losing life to find it a question of identity? Mm-hmm. Because when we place our identity in those things, I think we're trying to save life. We're trying to save something that doesn't bring us any life. And when we're willing to see those things as sometimes necessary things, a job to pay, to pay rent, or a nice shirt, or
That's a nice shirt.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
This is not bad, but if I start thinking that this shirt is who I am,
Yeah.
then that's where I think Jesus is saying, you're never going to find what I'm offering.
Yeah, it reminds me of before I've been here for almost 2 years now, but I remember, so I was really struggling financially in around like between 2010 and 2012, I was like out of work, underemployed. And so when I finally got a position in ministry in a church, like I was so grateful. And I remember, so often I would just be walking, for exercise, and I'd kind of be praying and offering gratitude, and I would say, God, thank you for this job. Like, thank you that I can pay my bills. Like, thank you. And then like something in me caused me to pause. And I said, and God, help me not to make it an idol. Because I knew that there may come a time where in following Jesus, I would have to sacrifice it or lose it. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we need to be aware of, and one of the questions that we can ask ourselves and maybe ask everybody, who's joining us today. Like, what is that thing that you are trying to protect?
That you've made an idol.
Yeah, that you've made an idol, or what is that thing that as you hear God or Jesus calling you in a certain direction, you say, I would, but this, right? And sometimes, in trying to preserve those things, we kind of keep them away, and bury them in trying to preserve our lives. But sometimes you can bury something so deeply that it can't do anything but die, right? And so we lose it, our lives in the attempt to preserve them. But yeah, I just wonder in the time that we have left, if we could just invite people to think about that.
What do we need to let go? What have we idolized to the point that it's keeping us from finding life? What do we need to let go of? So Janice, will you maybe just play us some contemplative music, and while we sit here and invite our listeners to our folks who are worshiping with us this morning, to just have some time to ponder on what Shalise has said in that, and give us just a little bit of time.
Will you come and follow me if I but call your name? Will you go where you don't know and never be the same? Will you let my love be shown? Will you let my name be known? Will you let my life be grown in you and you in me? Will you let the blinded see if I but call your name? Will you set the prisoner free and never be the same? Will you kiss the leper clean and do such as this unseen, and admit to what you mean in you and you in me? Will you love the you hide if I but call your name? Will you quell the fear inside and never be the same? Will you use the faith you found to reshape the world around through my sight and touch and sound in you and you in me? Lord, your echo summons true when you but call my name. Let me turn and follow you and never be the same. In your company I'll go where your love and footsteps show. Thus I'll move and live and grow in you and you in me.
Will you go when it's uncomfortable? Will you go when you're afraid? Will you go in peace, making peace, creating peace, and doing justice? Will we go?